This tutorial is to show you a basic program which uses the concept of arrays. We're moving into the content of Chapter 7. So with that, I'm creating a program right here called Arrays1, and it is in my new folder which I call Chapter 7. So I'll say OK. And I'm going to model a lot of the content that I'm doing here from the notes that you guys have in your module, your Moodle package. So let me go ahead and move this over, and all I really need at this point is just a button and a list box. Now, I have been told by previous teachers that I've worked with in the past for computer science that arrays tends to be a challenging concept for students. Now, I don't know if I've had that experience myself. To me, arrays seem very, very simple, but I know for some people it gets to be a problem. So what I'm going to ask you to do is tune in and don't let anything slip by as we put this together. Just make sure that this all makes sense. Now, just like on this first assignment, I've got a form that says make an array of 7 things. So I'm going to go ahead and change this button so it says that. Make an array of 7 things. Now, I got to tell you, the way I think of an array is like a dresser at home, where you keep your clothes and everything else. You have a drawer 1 where you keep stuff, you have a drawer 2, you have a drawer 3, you have a drawer 4. So I kind of think of arrays like that. In computer science, we start numbering things at a funny place, a place that most people don't number at. We start numbering at 0. So we're going to say the very first drawer you have in that dresser is going to be dresser or drawer 0 always. So let me go ahead and create this array. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this button. You know, just to save ourselves a little bit of time, let's go to our notes, and I'm going to scroll down just a little bit to where we have the code, and I'll copy all the code I have from beginning to end here in this program directly below in my notes, and I'm just going to paste it into here. I'll paste it here, and let's just go through it line by line. First thing I do is I declare I. And I is an integer because it becomes a tool that I use to get at specific drawers. I is going to be used for, am I going to get at drawer 0? Am I going to get at drawer 1? Am I going to get at drawer 2? Am I going to get at drawer 3? And so on. So that's the tool I'm going to use there. The actual dresser that's going to store stuff is X. You'll notice X is declared as an integer, but for the first time in this class you're seeing parentheses behind the X. This means it's an array. This is a data tool that we use often in an array. So this array says X of 6. The surprising thing about this is in any other language that would mean you would get 6 things. In Visual Basic, we don't do Visual Basic like a lot of other languages. If you declare 6, you're going to get 7 things. Now, I don't know who thought that one up, but that's the way it is in Visual Basic. So I just want you to know that we get 7 things. The only way I can start to rationalize this is if we start counting at 0 and we go up to this as a final index, can you guys all see that we are getting the items 0 through 6? And if we start counting at 0, that will give us 7 things. Can you guys kind of all see that? So that's the only way this makes sense to me. But I want to tell you, if we were doing C++, if we were doing Java, if you said you had 6 things, you would start counting at 0, and you would go up to index 5, and you would never see that 6th or that 7th drawer. You ask for 6 things, you get 6 things. So Visual Basic's a little bit different. Now, that's one thing I want you to remember. You write a 6 here, or whatever the number you write here, you always get 1 more than you ask for in the language of Visual Basic. Don't forget it. Now, down here, I actually put things into the drawers. in the very first drawer, which I'm calling drawer 0, I'm going to put the number 99. In the second drawer, which I'm going to call x of 1, I'm going to put the number 42. In x of 2, I'm going to put in the number 79. In x of 3, I put in the number 6, and so on, all the way down. Now, the beautiful thing about putting information away in organized fashion of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is if I am using a single variable to collect all this information, and I have a systematic way of putting things into drawers as I'm calling them, then I can access those things automatically using a tool like a loop. So I can automate how I get at that information, how I process it. I can even sort it. And this becomes an incredibly powerful tool within computer science. For the first time, I'm going to be able to do really amazing things with arrays, one of the most important tools that I have. So there's a little bit of vocabulary I want to give you here. The X here is the name of the array. Up here, where I give that number 6, it really means that I'm getting 7 things. So this reference to 6 here refers to size. So if I see a 6, I know my size is 7, where I declare it. To have an array, you have to have 3 things. You have to have the name of the array. You have to say something about its size. And you have to give the data type of that array. I have all 3 of those things here. Do you guys see that? Name, size, data type. It's an integer. I could make an array of strings. I could make an array of doubles. I could make an array of buttons or labels. Anything you can think of that's an object within Visual Basic, I can make an array of. Down here, I have the name again, but to access an item within that array, now this isn't referring to size. I only do that in the declaration. What's in the parentheses now refers to where I am. And where I am is referred to as the index or the subscript. So 0 below is the index or subscript. The item that goes into the array, the 99, is called the element or member, just like if you're talking about a set. So now those are some new terms I need you to keep track of. I want you to know what an index is, which refers to where something is in an array, and the word element, which refers to what is in the array. Do you see the difference between the two? Now, what I've got here is a nice little program that puts some numbers into an array called X, and I then output everything in that array to my list box. Let's go ahead and run this program. And you will see, when I click on this, I see all the numbers I just entered in the array. Now, how is it doing this? Well, I, as I told you before, is a really important variable here. It is going to represent the index of the variable that I'm trying to access. So when I try to access the variable or the value which is stored at index 0, first pass through the loop where I is equal to 0, I'm coming in with an x of 0. Next pass through, I'm coming in with an x of 1, which gets me at the 42. Next pass through, I'm coming in with an x of 2. That's going to get me at the 79. Do you all see how this is working? So I can actually change what drawer I'm in, or actually, to use another word besides drawer, what index I'm at. Drawer is kind of common sense terminology. Index is the actual word that we use in computer science. Now, at this point, let's go ahead and go on to the next program that we have in the notes to see what we've got there. Okay, so now it says I've got an example of an array program. So it says first, let's create a simple array. So here, I'm going to create an array of strings, and then I'm going to output this array of strings. So we just saw an example of where we created an array of numbers. Let's now create an array of strings. I'm going to close this right now. I'm not going to look at my code. I'll make up something kind of similar to that. So let's go ahead and paste another button down. And I'm going to say make an array of, I'll call this strings. 7 strings. Whereas before, it might be a little more specific to say 7 numbers. And actually, I think they were integers, weren't they? Maybe it'd be more specific if I said integers. Now let's see if you remember how much we did from before. Let's first deal with the declaration. I want to declare an array of 7 strings. Can anybody tell me what that line of code would look like? First word, what's it going to be? Dim, I as, not as a string, this is going to be an integer. The integer, or the index, is always going to be an integer that allows me to get at the things in the array. Now, let's go ahead and declare the actual array item here. Dim what? Yeah, I could call it X. It can be anything you want. It might be more relevant if you call it like my strings or something like that. So I'll just call it my strings. But X would work, Y would work. You can call it anything you want. But we always want to use descriptive variables as we do this. Now what? Okay, I got to have that in there. That's true, but this is going to be in an array. How do I make it an array? Yes, after my strings. Now, let's say that I want to have a certain number of strings. I was saying, what, 6 things before? Is that what I was saying? If I want to have exactly 6 things, what is the number that I have to write here? I have to write 1 less. That is the tricky thing about arrays. Always ask for 1 less, or always write 1 less than what you actually need. So I need 6 strings. This is going to give it to me. I got 6 strings here because I get 1 more than I asked for. Does everybody see that? Now, let's go ahead and set some stuff into here. We don't have to use the message we've got. Does somebody have a profound message they'd like to share today? Anybody thinking about anything? How about index? What's the first available index, guys? 0. So I'm going to say my strings of 0 equals, let's write something profound. Where's a good restaurant to eat at in town? Somebody got a good name of a restaurant? Botticelli's? 2 people voting for that. My students, unquote. That's enough of that sentence. Let's make a whole message, okay? My strings of, what's the next available index? 1. So I'm going to say something to the effects, my students like to eat at Botticelli's. And I'm going to try to make this so that it comes out with 6 things. My students, next message, like, unquote, my strings of 2, my strings of 3 like to eat, my strings of 4 is going to be at, my strings of 5. And you know what? I don't think I'm going to have enough stuff to fill in all 6 positions here. I'll say at the actually I do. We called for 5 things. I'm on my 5th index. We're right on the money, aren't we? At Botticelli's. By no means is this a plug for Botticelli's. I wouldn't sell a product. I hope I spelled that right. Is it 1 T or 2? Does anybody know? 1, 2? 1? Is the rest right? Does that look about right? Okay, now let's see if we can recreate that loop that'll spit all of this out to screen. Now, one thing we probably want to do is let's clear out the list box so we don't see anything displayed there from before that's garbage. So I'm going to say listbox1 dot what? Items dot clear. That's true. And now let's go ahead and add all the items to the list box. So what's the first word I'm going to write here on the next line? For what? I equals what? 0 to what? 5. Now, down here where it's got next, let's be specific. I'm going to say next I. And now you can see why it's so important to talk about loops before we talk about arrays. So there was a little bit of method to our madness here. Let's add the item to the list box. I'm going to say what? What's the next word I write? Listbox1 dot what? Items dot what? Add what? Not I. What am I going to add? My strings. My strings what? Let's say parentheses, just to reinforce the fact you need your parentheses of I. Okay, parentheses of I. But in reality, my strings at index I is what you're saying, and that will allow you to go through a 0 for I, and then a 1, and then a 2, and then a 3, and then a 4, all the way up to the 5 until we see the whole message. Let's see if we get it. I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this. I've got one error. We've got to get to the bottom of that. Let's find out what's wrong. It says that I'm running a program, so that might be just on my end. Let me rebuild it now. It looks like everything's okay. Let's start it up. I click that button, and there it is. Now, let's do something that you're never supposed to do. Whatever you do, don't do what I'm about to do. I am going to go to index 6. Does index 6 exist? No, there is no 6th drawer in this dresser. Do you understand? 6 is not possible. So when you go to build it, Visual Basic's happy enough. It'll say you can do that. Does anybody have any idea what's going to happen if I try to see what's in the 6th drawer and it doesn't exist? What would you expect? Most likely it'll crash. So if I click on this, it's like, uh-oh, this is a hard crash too. Index out of range exception was handled. And this is a very low level error. It's pretty severe because you might be dealing with the stack at this point, and things that low might lead to your computer crashing altogether. So arrays generally cause really hard crashes, so be very careful. Not quite as hard as writing to file. That will cause even lower level crashes. Writing and reading from file are even more severe because you're turning over your operating system, or you're turning over your control of your computer to your operating system. This is pretty close to that, so beware. Okay, guys, with that, I'm going to conclude the first tutorial.